Every prison in the Bible. Why God does his greatest work in the smallest spaces. An old man sits on a black volcanic rock and watches the sea. The island is small, 10 miles long. Rough terrain, sharp edges, no harbor worth the name. The Romans use it the way you use a locked drawer. You put something inside that you want to forget about, and you walk away. The man has been here long enough to know every tide, every season, every shade the Aegean turns at dusk. He is not young. Most of the people he loved are already dead, killed in arenas, crucified on roads, beheaded in courtyards. He is the last one, the last man standing from that first circle. He picks up a reed. He begins to write. We will come back to him, but not yet. Before we get to that old man on the rock, we need to talk about what you do with a room you did not choose and cannot leave. Maybe you know that room. Maybe you are in it right now. It is not always made of stone. Sometimes it is a diagnosis that arrived on a Tuesday and changed the shape of every day after it. Sometimes it is a marriage that ended, a career that collapsed, a door that closed so completely you cannot find the seam where it used to be. Sometimes it is a grief that has no bottom. You keep falling and there is no floor. You did not choose this room. You cannot leave it on your own. And the silence inside it is the loudest thing you have ever heard. The Bible has something to say to every person in that room. Not a platitude, not a greeting card. Something harder than that, and truer than that, and older than that. Because here is what most people miss when they read their Bibles. God has a pattern. He has used it from Genesis to Revelation, across thousands of years and dozens of lives. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The pattern is this. The people God used most were not the ones who had the easiest road. They were the ones who spent time in the smallest spaces, the darkest rooms, the places where no one could see them and nothing seemed to be happening. This is not a story about suffering. This is not a story about punishment. This is not a story about what God allows. This is a story about what God builds and where He always, always chooses to build it. 4 prisons, 4 men, thousands of years of human history, and one thread running through all of them that changes everything about what it means to be stuck. We begin in a field in Canaan. We begin with a boy, a coat, and a hole in the ground. The boy's name is Joseph. He is 17 years old. He is the 11th of 12 sons born to a man named Jacob. And if you know anything about families, you already know that being the 11th of 12 is rarely a comfortable position. But Joseph has something his brothers do not. His father loves him in a way that is visible, public, and deeply unwise. The kind of love that gets announced with expensive gifts and cannot help but make everyone else in the room aware of exactly where they rank. Jacob gives Joseph a coat. The Hebrew phrase used to describe it, ketonet pasim, likely means a garment with long sleeves, a richly ornamented robe, the kind worn by people who do not do manual labor, the kind worn by people who are going to inherit things. His brothers see that coat every single day, and then Joseph makes it worse. He dreams, twice. In the first dream, his brothers' sheaves of grain bow down to his sheaf. In the second, the sun and moon and 11 stars bow down to him. And here is where you have to give Joseph some grace. He is 17. He does not yet know what it costs to say certain things out loud, and so he tells his brothers both dreams in detail. They do not take it well. The day comes, and it comes the way these days always come. Ordinary on the surface, catastrophic underneath when Jacob sends Joseph out to check on his brothers in the fields near Shechem. Joseph walks out toward them in that coat. His brothers see him coming from a distance, and the text says something that should stop you cold. It says they see him, and they plot to kill him. Not argue with him, not confront him, kill him. They seize him. They strip the coat off his back, and they throw him into a bore. A pit, a dry cistern, a hole in the earth with steep sides and no water at the bottom. Then, and this is the detail that has haunted readers for 3,000 years, the text says, they sat down to eat bread. Joseph is screaming in the pit. We know this because years later, when his brothers are standing before him in Egypt and do not yet know who he is, the text says they remembered his distress and the way he pleaded with them. They remembered it because it never left them. They sat on the ground above him, passing bread, while their brother screamed below. and God said nothing. No angel appeared, no voice from heaven, no immediate rescue, just a boy in a hole and the sound of his brothers eating. They sell him for 20 pieces of silver to a caravan of Ishmaelite traders heading south toward Egypt. Joseph watches Canaan disappear behind him. He is 17 years old. He does not speak the language where he is going. He does not know a single person in the country that is about to swallow him whole. And the last thing he saw of his family was his brothers counting coins. Egypt is not kind to him at first, and then it is not again. And this is the part of Joseph's story that people tend to rush past because they want to get to the ending. But do not rush past this, because the middle is where everything important happens. He is purchased by a man named Potiphar, captain of Pharaoh's guard, a powerful man, a man with a large household, and the authority to make Joseph's life either bearable or unbearable. And something unexpected happens. The text says the Lord was with Joseph, and that everything Joseph touched prospered. Potiphar notices. He promotes Joseph. He gives Joseph authority over his entire household, over his fields, over his finances. From the slave market to the head of staff, Joseph has climbed back, slowly, painfully, one faithful day at a time, to a position of dignity. And then Potiphar's wife looks at him. She pursues him. He refuses her, day after day, on the grounds that it would be a sin against both his master and his God. And one day, when no one else is in the house, she grabs his garment. Notice that word, begged in Hebrew, clothing taken from a man again. The second time, Joseph loses a garment to someone else's agenda, and he runs. He runs and leaves it in her hand. And she uses that garment to destroy him. She tells her husband that Joseph attacked her. She has the garment as evidence. Potiphar has Joseph thrown into prison, the place of chains, the holding facility for the king's prisoners. And once again, Joseph is in a hole. This one has stone walls instead of dirt walls, but it is a hole. He is falsely accused. He has done everything right. He has been faithful to his master, faithful to his God, faithful under conditions that would have broken most people, and he is in prison anyway. Here is what most people miss when they read this moment. God does not explain himself. There is no verse where God appears to Joseph in the prison and says, I know this is hard, but here is the plan. Here is the timeline. Here is why this is happening. Nothing like that occurs. What the text says instead is quieter and stranger and in some ways harder to accept. The Lord was with Joseph in the prison, not rescuing him from the prison, with him in it. That distinction matters more than we usually let it. Two men land in that same prison, the king's cupbearer and the king's baker, both of whom have offended Pharaoh in ways the text does not specify. Both of them dream on the same night. Both of them wake up troubled. And Joseph, this young Hebrew man who has every reason to be consumed entirely by his own misery, looks at their faces and asks them a question. He says, Why do you look so sad today? Read that slowly. Joseph is in a foreign prison, falsely accused, forgotten by everyone who could have helped him, and he is asking someone else why they look sad. This is not a small thing. This is a portrait of a man whose suffering has not turned him inward. It has made him more attentive to the people around him, not less. He interprets both dreams. He tells the cupbearer that in 3 days he will be restored to his position before Pharaoh. And then Joseph says something that reveals exactly how human he is beneath all this faithfulness. He says to the cupbearer, When things go well for you, remember me. Mention me to Pharaoh. Get me out of here. I was stolen from my homeland, and I have done nothing to deserve this prison. 3 days later, the cupbearer walks out of that prison into sunlight and clean linen and wine, his old life handed back to him like nothing happened. And the historian Josephus, writing in his Antiquities of the Jews, notes the remarkable detail that Joseph, a Hebrew slave, had been trusted with significant administrative duties inside the prison itself. A man the system had written off, running the room the system had thrown him into, a man who kept showing up anyway. But the cupbearer does not remember Joseph. The text says it plainly, without drama, which somehow makes it worse. The chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. 2 more years pass. Say that again slowly. 2 more years. Joseph has already been in Egypt for years. He has already done his time in Potiphar's house. He has already survived the false accusation. He has already interpreted the dream correctly. done everything he was supposed to do, asked one reasonable favor of one man who owed him, and that man walked out into the sunlight and forgot he existed. 2 more years of stone walls. 2 more years of silence from heaven. 2 more years of a God who is apparently in no hurry whatsoever. Stay with me, because this is the part of Joseph's story that nobody frames and hangs on their wall, but it may be the most important part. The part between the promise and the fulfillment. The part where nothing seems to be happening. The part where you have done everything right, and the door is still closed, and the silence is still loud, and the cupbearer is somewhere in the palace eating grapes and has completely forgotten your name. What do you do with that room? What do you do when you have been faithful, and the faithfulness has not yet produced anything you can see? Joseph waits. That is all the text gives us. He waits. And underneath that waiting, God is building something, a character, a depth, a capacity for mercy that could only be formed in exactly the kind of pressure Joseph is living inside. 13 years between the pit and the palace. 13 years that looked, from the outside, like pure waste. They were not waste, they were the work. 2 prisons, 13 years, one man who did everything right and spent a decade and 3 years watching the wrong people walk free. And God never once explained himself. If you have been watching this far, you already know that Joseph's story does not end in that prison. It ends in a palace, with a title, with the power to feed an entire civilization through 7 years of famine. The pit becomes the preparation room. The chains become the curriculum. But we are not done yet, because Joseph is only the first prison. Daniel is next, and his prison has teeth. If this video is landing somewhere real for you, if you are in a room right now that you did not choose and cannot leave, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because we are going to keep going, and what comes next is going to matter to you. Every prison in this video is different. Every man inside it is different, but the God standing outside every door is the same, and he has never once abandoned anyone he put in a small space. Stay with us. Daniel is not 17 years old when they throw him into the lion's den. That is important. When we picture Daniel in the den, we tend to picture someone young, a boy with wide eyes, and a shaft of light falling on him from above. But the man who walks into that den is old. He has served 3 kings and survived each transition of power, which in the ancient Near East was roughly equivalent to surviving 3 separate earthquakes. He has watched empires rise and fall around him. He has prayed toward Jerusalem 3 times a day for decades, through every political season, through every threat, through every administration that told him to stop. He has never stopped. His knees are worn smooth from the stone floor. He is, in the language of the Hebrew Scriptures, a tzaddik, a righteous one. Psalm 34, verse 19 says it plainly. Many are the afflictions of the tzaddik, but the Lord delivers him from them all. Daniel is the living definition of that word. And what you need to understand about the tzaddik in Scripture is that the suffering does not come despite the righteousness. It comes because of it. Daniel is not in the lion's den because he did something wrong. He is there because he did something right and the wrong people noticed. Here is what happened. King Darius has reorganized his empire into 120 provinces. Over all the governors, he has placed 3 administrators. Daniel is one of the 3. And the text says something that should make you smile, despite what comes next. It says Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. His colleagues do not take this well. They search for grounds to bring charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs. They cannot find any. The text is direct. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. So they cannot attack his work. They cannot attack his character. There is only one angle left. They say to each other, and you can hear the exhausted frustration in this. We will never find any basis for charges against this man unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So they build a trap out of his faithfulness. They go to the king flattering him, which kings tend to enjoy, and persuade him to issue a decree. For 30 days, no one may pray to any god or human being except Darius himself. The penalty is the lion's den. The king signs it. Under Persian law, a royal decree cannot be revoked, not even by the king who signed it. The trap is set. Daniel goes home. He opens the windows of his upper room, the windows that face Jerusalem, the windows he has opened every day for decades, and he kneels down and prays, exactly as he has always done, 3 times that day, with the windows open, where anyone walking past can see him. He does not hide. He does not negotiate a temporary compromise. He does not pray quietly in a closet for 30 days and resume his public faith when the danger passes. He opens the windows. And this is where it gets remarkable. The king, when he hears what has happened, is devastated. The text says he was greatly distressed and worked until sunset trying to find a legal way to rescue Daniel. There is no legal way. The decree cannot be revoked. And so Darius, the most powerful man in the known world, watches while his most trusted administrator is thrown into a pit of lions, with a stone rolled over the mouth and sealed with the king's own signet ring. And then the text does something extraordinary. It says the king could not sleep. Daniel is in the den. Darius is in the palace. And of the 2 of them, the one inside the stone and the one behind the palace walls, it is the king who cannot rest. At the first light of dawn, Darius runs to the den and calls out in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you?" And a voice comes back from inside the stone. "My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight." 1 man, 1 sealed den, 1 angel with instructions, and the most powerful empire on earth could not touch him. But notice what God did not do. God did not prevent the den. God did not stop the decree. God did not cause the king to find a loophole. Daniel went into the den. The stone was rolled. The seal was set. And inside that sealed, dark, animal-filled space, God was already there. The same pattern as Joseph, different walls, same God. Now we cross from the Old Testament to the New, from Babylon to a Roman colony called Philippi, in what is now northern Greece. From an elderly statesman to 2 men with bleeding backs and their feet locked in wooden stocks. Their names are Paul and Silas. Paul you likely know, former Pharisee, trained under the great teacher Gamaliel, one of the sharpest legal minds of his generation, a man who once stood holding the coats of people stoning a believer to death, who hunted Christians from city to city, who met Jesus on a road outside Damascus and was never the same again. By this point in Acts chapter 16, Paul has been run out of multiple cities, beaten more than once, and is fully aware that following Jesus in the Roman Empire is not a path with obvious long-term security. Silas, you may know less. His name means asked of God. Both men, Paul, whose Hebrew name Saul, shares the same root carry that meaning between them. Asked of God. Both of them, walking together into a city that is about to test exactly what they were asked for. They arrive in Philippi. They cast a spirit out of a slave girl who had been earning money for her owners through fortune-telling. The owners, furious at their loss of income, drag Paul and Silas before the magistrates. The crowd joins the attack. The magistrates order them stripped and beaten with rods. The text does not soften this. It says they were severely flogged. Then they are thrown into the inner cell of the prison, and the jailer fastens their feet in the stocks. The inner cell, the desmoterion, the place of chains. Literally the place where people are bound. It is midnight. Their backs are open wounds. Their feet are locked in wood. They are in the deepest part of a Roman prison, as far from the exit as it is possible to be. And here is the sentence in Acts 16 that has stopped readers cold for 2,000 years at midnight. Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Read that again. The other prisoners were listening. These are men who have every reason to be consumed by their own pain, their own injustice, their own unanswered questions. Instead, they are singing. And the men in the cells around them, men who have heard every kind of sound a Roman prison produces at midnight, are listening. Something about worship in a place where no one worships is arresting in the most literal sense. You cannot ignore it. You cannot explain it away. And then the earth moves. Suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. Every door flew open. Every chain fell loose. Every prisoner in that facility was, in a single moment, free to walk out, including the 2 men with the bleeding backs. The jailer wakes. He sees the doors open. In the Roman military, a soldier was responsible with his life for his prisoners. If they escaped, he paid with his own. The jailer draws his sword. He is about to end his own life, rather than face what he thinks has happened. And Paul shouts from the darkness, "Don't harm yourself. We are all here. Nobody ran." In an earthquake, with every chain broken and every door open, not a single prisoner walked out. Because two men had been singing at midnight, and the sound of it had done something to the room that the earthquake itself could not undo. The jailer calls for lights. He rushes in, and the text says he falls trembling before Paul and Silas and asks them the only question that matters anymore. "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" That night, the jailer and his entire household are baptized. A church is planted in Philippi, a church Paul will later write to from another prison, in Rome, with the words, "I have learned, in whatever state I am, to be content." The letter is called Philippians. It is one of the most joyful documents in the history of human literature. It was written in chains. The historian Pliny the Younger, writing to Emperor Trajan around AD 112, describes Roman policy toward Christians in Asia Minor, the same region where Paul traveled, confirming that imprisonment and exile were standard tools used against those who refused to abandon their faith. Paul was not a theological exception to this policy. He was one of thousands, but he sang anyway. And the singing shook foundations. Same pattern, different walls, same God. Now we come back to the old man on the rock. His name is John. You know him as the disciple whom Jesus loved, his own description of himself, written with a quiet tenderness that never quite got over being chosen. He was a fisherman from Galilee, the son of Zebedee, the brother of James. He was there at the Transfiguration, on the mountain, when Jesus' face shone like the sun. He was there in Gethsemane, when Jesus sweat drops of blood in the dark, and the disciples kept falling asleep. He was there at the cross, the only male disciple who did not run standing close enough to hear Jesus speak, close enough to be entrusted with the care of Jesus' mother in the final minutes of the crucifixion. He was there at the empty tomb, running, outrunning Peter, stopping at the entrance, looking in at the folded grave clothes, and believing he has outlived all of them now. Peter crucified upside down in Rome. James, John's own brother, beheaded by Herod Agrippa, the first apostle to die. Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, gone. All of them, in various cities, in ways that history records with varying levels of detail. Judas Iscariot gone by his own hand before any of the others. John is the last one. He is somewhere between 80 and 90 years old. He has planted churches across Asia Minor. He has written a gospel and 3 letters. He has been boiled in oil. According to the early church writer Tertullian, survived it, somehow, which must have bewildered his persecutors as much as it bewildered him. He has watched the Jerusalem temple destroyed, exactly as Jesus said it would be. He has watched the Roman Empire execute believers by the thousands. And now Emperor Domitian, the emperor who demanded to be addressed as Lord and God, who particularly despised the Christians of Asia Minor for refusing to honor the imperial cult, has exiled John to an island. The island is called Patmos. It is a volcanic rock in the Aegean Sea, roughly 10 miles long and 6 miles wide. The terrain is harsh, the soil is thin. The Romans use it as a penal colony, a place where you send people you want to silence without the political inconvenience of a public execution. Eusebius, the church historian writing in the early 4th century, records in his ecclesiastical history that John was condemned to dwell on the island of Patmos in testimony of the divine word, and that after Domitian's death, John was released and returned to Ephesus. The exile was meant to be permanent. It lasted until the emperor died. John arrives on a black volcanic rock in the middle of the sea. He is the last living eyewitness to the resurrection. He is the last person on earth who looked Jesus of Nazareth in the face, and heard him speak, and touched his hands, and ate fish with him on a beach, after the grave could not hold him. And he is here, on a rock, in exile. Pay attention to this. The word John uses for the book he is about to write is apocalypto, to uncover, to reveal, to pull back a veil from something that was always there but could not previously be seen. We get our word apocalypse from this root, and we have done that word a disservice by associating it only with disaster. And Apocalypto is not primarily about destruction. It is about revelation. It is about a curtain being pulled back. It is about something hidden being made finally, permanently visible. And God chose a prison island to pull it back. Think about what that means. The Roman Empire, with the most powerful army and administration the ancient world had ever produced, controlling everything from Britain to Babylon, looked at the last eyewitness to the resurrection and said, "We will put him on a rock in the middle of the sea, and he will be silent, and the movement will eventually die without its last living voice." Instead, on that rock, John falls on his face before a vision so overwhelming that the text says he becomes like a dead man, a voice like a trumpet, a figure whose face is like the sun shining in full strength. 7 golden lampstands, eyes like blazing fire, feet like bronze glowing in a furnace. And the voice says, and these are the first words spoken to John on the prison island, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I am alive forever and ever. And I hold the keys of death and of the grave." I hold the keys. Say that slowly. The empire thought it held the keys to John's freedom, the keys to the church's future, the keys to whether this movement lived or died on a volcanic rock in the Aegean Sea. And Jesus appears to the last disciple on the prison island and says, "I hold the keys, not Caesar, not Domitian, not the empire that built the roads and the aqueducts and the penal colonies, me." And then God does what he has always done in every prison in this story. He does not immediately open the door. He does not send an earthquake. He does not dispatch a release order. He comes to the last man standing on a black volcanic rock in the middle of the sea, and he gives him the biggest assignment anyone has ever received in a place of exile. He says, "Write what you see. Write it to the 7 churches. Write it for everyone who comes after you, everyone who will be afraid, everyone who will be in a room they did not choose and cannot leave. Everyone who will wonder whether the empire has finally won. Write it all down." The book of Revelation, the most studied, most argued over, most searched document in the history of the church, was written by a prisoner. The last book of the Bible, the one that closes the whole story that started in a garden, the one with the new heaven and the new earth, and the river of the water of life, and God dwelling with his people, and no more death, and no more crying, and no more pain. That book was written in exile, on a volcanic rock, by the last man standing, under a regime that thought it had silenced him forever. This is not a coincidence. This is not an unfortunate circumstance that God worked around. This is the pattern, the same pattern as Joseph's pit, Daniel's den, Paul's midnight chains brought to its fullest, most cosmic expression. God did not write around the prison. He wrote through it. Now think about the room you are in. Not the room you want to be in. Not the room you planned to be in when you mapped out how your life was going to go. The room you are actually in right now, the one with walls you did not choose, and a door you cannot open from the inside. The diagnosis room, the grief room. The waiting room where you have been sitting so long the chairs have started to feel permanent. The relationship that ended. The dream that has not arrived. The prayer you have been praying for so long that you have started to wonder whether anyone is listening. What if that room is not the end of your story? What if it is not even a detour from your story? What if the room is where the story is actually being written? Joseph spent 13 years in 2 prisons before he stood before Pharaoh with the wisdom to save a civilization. Daniel spent a night in a den that could have killed him and came out the other side with a testimony that has been read for 2,500 years. Paul and Silas spent one midnight in a place of chains with bleeding backs and broken chains, and a jailer who found Jesus on the floor of a prison. And John, the last one, the last man standing, the last eyewitness, spent his exile on a black volcanic rock and wrote the last words of the Bible. This is not a story about what God allows. This is not a story about suffering having a silver lining. This is not a story about positive thinking or resilience or making the best of a bad situation. This is a story about a God who does not avoid the smallest spaces, who walks into them, who was himself placed in one wrapped in cloth, laid in a tomb, with a stone rolled in front and a seal set and guards posted outside, who came out of that sealed space on the 3rd day with the keys of death and the grave in his hand. Every prison in this Bible points forward to that one. And every prison after it, yours included, sits in the shadow of an empty tomb. So let me leave you with three things. The first is this: every prison in this Bible produced something that outlasted the prison itself. Joseph's suffering produced a wisdom that fed a civilization through 7 years of famine. His 13 years in 2 holes in the ground gave him something no palace education could have manufactured: the capacity to govern with mercy, to see the long hand of God in situations that looked, from the inside, like pure abandonment. Daniel's night in the den produced a testimony read in every century since, by people in their own dens, in their own sealed spaces, who needed to know that an angel had once shut the mouths of lions and could do it again. Paul's chains produced Philippians, Ephesians, Colossians, Philemon documents that have shaped Christian thought for 2,000 years, translated into thousands of languages, read in prison cells by prisoners who did not know they were reading something written in a prison cell. And John's exile produced Revelation, the last word, the closing vision, the final promise that every tear will be wiped away, and every grave will be emptied, and every prison door will stand permanently open. The walls came down. The words remained. The second thing is this: the space you are in right now is not wasted. I know that is easy to say, and hard to believe when you are inside it. I know that 13 years feels like 13 years. And that 2 more years on top of the first round feels like a cruelty that no framework quite covers in the moment. I know that a midnight with bleeding backs is still a midnight with bleeding backs, even when an earthquake is coming. But every person in this video, Joseph, Daniel, Paul, Silas, John, every single one of them came out of their prison carrying something they could not have carried any other way. The preparation happened inside the pressure. The depth was formed in the dark. You are not waiting for your life to begin. Your life is happening right now in this room, in this season, in this silence that feels like absence but may be the most concentrated presence you have ever been standing in. God is not late. He was in the prison before you arrived. And the third thing, the one I want you to carry out of this video and back into whatever room you are walking into tonight, is this: the Bible you hold in your hands was written, in significant part, by prisoners. Moses wrote in the wilderness, which is its own kind of exile. David wrote his most desperate psalms from caves in enemy territory, from the years when Saul hunted him like an animal. Jeremiah wrote Lamentations, from the ruins of a city that had been everything he loved. Paul wrote from chains. John wrote from a rock in the sea. The Word of God was not written from the mountaintop looking down. It was written from the valley, from the pit, from the bore, from the desmoterion, from a volcanic island that the Roman Empire used as a place for people it wanted to forget, which means that when you open that book in your darkest room, you are not reading words written by people who never knew what dark rooms felt like. You are reading words written inside them. The ink and the chains were in the same hand. The revelation and the rock were in the same place. The most important things God ever said to humanity, He said through people who had nowhere else to go, and nothing left to lose, and a reed in their hand, and a page in front of them, and a God who had not, despite all appearances, gone anywhere. This is not a story about suffering. This is not a story about endurance. This is not a story about making the best of a bad situation. This is a story about a God who is already in the room. He was in the pit with Joseph before the brothers finished their bread. He was in the den with Daniel before the stone was rolled. He was in the place of chains with Paul and Silas before the earthquake moved. He was on the rock with John before the vision came. And He is in whatever room you are in right now, not watching from the outside, not waiting for you to find the exit, but present, working, building something in the dark that the light will eventually reveal. The walls are not the end of the story. They never were. Before you go, I want to ask you one question, and I genuinely want to know your answer. Which prison in this video hit closest to home for you? Was it Joseph, the long wait, the forgotten promise, the 2 more years? Was it Daniel doing everything right and ending up in the den anyway? Was it Paul and Silas, the midnight that had to be worshipped through before the morning came? Or was it John, the last man standing on a rock, wondering if it all meant anything, and finding out it meant everything? Tell me below. I read every comment. And if this video reached you in a room you did not choose, share it with someone else who is in one. Because somewhere tonight, Someone is in a pit with steep sides, and they need to know that the God who was with Joseph is still in the business of rolling stones away. The last book of the Bible was written by a prisoner on a rock in the sea. God always saves the biggest revelation for the smallest space.